pandemic is an epidemic occurring on a scale that crosses international boundaries, usually affecting people on a worldwide scale. As human civilization moved from one place to another and grew in numbers exponentially, infections and pandemics became more common. In this video, I am going to discuss briefly what might have been the pandemics that this world has gone through over the years according to the probable yet not accurate timeline. Plague of Athens 430 BC. The earliest recorded pandemic happened during the Peloponnesian War. After the disease passed through Libya, Ethiopia and Egypt, it crossed the Athenian walls as the Spartans laid siege. As much as 2/3 of the population died. What exactly this pandemic was has long been a source of debate among scientists. A number of diseases have been put forward as possibilities, including typhoid fever and Ebola. Many scholars believe that overcrowding caused by the war exacerbated the epidemic. Sparta's army was stronger, forcing the Athenians to take refuge behind a series of fortifications called the Long Walls that protected their city. Despite the epidemic, the war continued on, not ending until 404 BC, when Athens was forced to capitulate. Plague of Cyprian AD 250 to 271, named after Saint Cyprian, a bishop of Carthage, a city in Tunisia, who described the epidemic as signaling the end of the world. The plague of Cyprian is estimated to have killed 5,000 people a day in Rome alone. In 2014, archaeologists in Luxor found what appears to be a mass burial site of plague victims. Their bodies were covered with a thick layer of lime, historically used as a disinfectant. City dwellers fled to the country to escape infection, but instead spread the disease further. Possibly starting in Ethiopia, it passed through northern Africa into Rome, then on to Egypt and northward. There were recurring outbreaks over the next 3 centuries. Plague of Justinian 541 AD. Named after the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, who reigned since 527 to 565 AD. Under his reign, the Byzantine Empire reached its greatest extent, controlling territory that stretched from the Middle East to Western Europe. Justinian constructed a great cathedral known as Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, the empire's capital. Justinian also got sick with the plague and survived. However, his empire gradually lost territory in the time after the plague struck. Recurrences over the next 2 centuries eventually killed about 50 million people, 26% of the world's population. It is believed to be the first significant appearance of the bubonic plague, which features enlarged lymphatic gland and is carried by rats and spread by fleas. Black Death 1346 to 1353. Responsible for the death of 1/3 of the world's population, this second large outbreak of the bubonic plague possibly started in Asia and moved west in caravans. Entering through Sicily in 1347 AD, when plague sufferers arrived in the port of Messina, it spread through Europe rapidly. It was caused by a strain of the bacterium Yersinia pestis that is likely extinct today and was spread by fleas on infected rodents. The bodies of victims were buried in mass graves. Studies suggest that surviving workers had better access to meat and higher quality bread. The lack of cheap labor may also have contributed to the technological innovation. The Columbian Exchange of 1492 and 1545 to 1548. Upon arrival on the island of Hispaniola, Christopher Columbus encountered the Taino people with a population of 60,000. By 1548, the population stood at less than 500. This scenario repeated itself throughout the Americas. In 1520, the Aztec Empire was destroyed by a smallpox infection. The disease killed many of its victims and incapacitated others. It weakened the population so they were unable to resist Spanish colonizers and left farmers unable to produce the needed crops. A recent study that examined DNA from the skeletons of the victims found that they were infected with the subspecies of Salmonella known as Salmonella paratyphi, which causes enteric fever, a category of fever that includes typhoid. American plagues and the Great Plague of London, 17th century. The diseases helped the Spanish force led by Hernan Cortes conquer the Aztec capital in 1519, and another Spanish force led by Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas in 1532. The Spanish took over the territories of both empires. In both cases, the Aztec and the Incan armies had been ravaged by disease and were unable to withstand the Spanish forces. When citizens of Britain, France, Portugal, and the Netherlands began exploring, conquering, and settling in the Western Hemisphere, they were also helped by the fact that the disease had vastly reduced the size of any indigenous groups that opposed them. In another devastating appearance, the bubonic plague led to the death of 20% of London's population. As human death tolls mounted and mass graves appeared, hundreds of thousands of cats and dogs were slaughtered as the possible cause, and the disease spread through ports along the Thames. The worst of the outbreak tapered off in the fall of 1666, around the same time as another destructive event, the Great Fire of London. The plague continued its wave of destruction to Marseille and Russia, killing vast majority of populations in these regions. The cholera pandemics of 1817-19th century, the first of 7 cholera pandemics over the next 150 years. This wave of small intestine infection originated in Russia, where 1 million people died, spreading through feces-infected water and food. The bacterium was passed along to British soldiers who brought it to India, where millions more died. The reach of the British Empire and its navy spread cholera to Spain, Africa, Indonesia, China, Japan, Italy, Germany, and America, where it killed 150,000 people. A vaccine was created in 1885, but pandemics continued. Spanish flu 1918 to 1920. The avian-borne flu that resulted in 50 million deaths worldwide. The 1918 flu was first observed in Europe, United States, and part of Asia before swiftly spreading around the world. At the time, there were no effective drugs or vaccines to treat this killer flu strain. Via services, reports of a flu outbreak in Madrid in the spring of 1918 led to the pandemic being called the Spanish flu. Despite the name Spanish flu, the disease likely did not start in Spain. Spain was a neutral nation during the war and did not enforce strict censorship of its press, which could therefore freely publish early accounts of the illness. As a result, people falsely believed the illness was specific to Spain and the name Spanish flu stuck. Asian flu 1957 to 1958. Starting in Hong Kong and spreading throughout China and then into the United States, the Asian flu became widespread in England, where over 6 months 14,000 people died. A second wave followed in early 1958, causing an estimated total of about 1.1 million deaths globally, with 116,000 deaths in the United States alone. A vaccine was developed effectively containing the pandemic. AIDS pandemic 1981 to present. AIDS has claimed an estimated 35 million lives since it was first identified. HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS, likely developed from a chimpanzee virus that transferred to humans in West Africa in the 1920s. The virus made its way around the world, and AIDS was a pandemic by the late 20th century. Now, about 64% of the estimated 40 million living with human immunodeficiency virus HIV live in the sub-Saharan Africa. For decades, the disease had no known cure, but medication developed in the 1990s now allows people with the disease to experience a normal lifespan with regular treatment. Even more encouraging that 2 people have been cured of HIV as of early 2020. H1N1 pandemic 2009 to 2010. The 2009 swine flu pandemic was caused by a new strain of H1N1 that originated in Mexico in the spring of 2009 before spreading to the rest of the world. In 1 year, the virus infected as many as 1.4 billion people across the globe and killed between 1,51,700 and 5,75,400 people. COVID-19 pandemic 2020. Well, Nothing much to say here, you've practically lived through.